Welcome to the Quote and Road podcast. My name is Kwok Pui Lan. In this podcast, you will hear intellectuals, religious leaders, and activists talking about their passion for justice. This afternoon, I am delighted to talk with my long-term friend, Mary Hunt, who is a Catholic feminist. Mary, can you tell us something about your life and your work?
Yes, thank you very much, Pui Lan. And before I do so, I want to congratulate you on this new project, Quack and Roll. I heard the first installment with Miguel de la Torre, and it was really terrific. And I think many people will learn from you and follow your example of being very proactive in these difficult times. So I'm Mary Hunt, a Catholic feminist theologian, co-founder and co-director with Diane New of WATER, the Women's Alliance for Theology, Ethics, and Ritual. WATER is a small nonprofit think and do tank inside the Beltway in Washington, D.C. area. I'm a white, cisgender, lesbian, a Catholic American with Irish roots, a bit of a sense of humor there. WATER is a modest think tank, now 40 years old, bringing feminist studies in religion to the service of social change. I specialize in questions related to women and women-identified persons, especially issues around sexuality, gender identity. We are an anti-racist and pro-trans group, and we work not just with Christians, in fact, but with people from all kinds of religious backgrounds and from no religious tradition whatsoever. I personally serve on the editorial boards of several journals. I work hard with the Women Church Convergence, which is an umbrella group for progressive, feminist-rooted Catholic women's groups. And I volunteer at a local food pantry here in Silver Spring, Maryland, which keeps me grounded in the reality of the ways in which we need to change the world. So all of my teaching, my writing, and my organizing efforts are focused on making social change for justice.
Since the inauguration of President Trump, the world has gone through so many changes. Can you share with us your feeling about what happened in the last few weeks?
Well, yes, and I live, as I mentioned, in the DC area, what we call the DMV, DC, Maryland, and Virginia, the DMV, which I think at the moment is the belly of the beast, or at least ground zero for very dramatic and draconian cuts, not only in workers, in the federal budget, but also in all of the infrastructure that surrounds that work. For example, in the 12 houses around me, that is my house and one on each side, and then 3 in front and 3 and 3, at least 8 people have worked for or are retired from the federal government. And this is a very serious economic hit for people in our area. There are many nonprofits as well, many defense contractors, many small businesses that depend on government funding. So this is a local issue for us as well as a national and of course an international issue. I have now lived 73 years and I have never seen anything remotely like this. The analogs are not pretty. I think we were looking also at an erosion of culture as well as an erosion of government. The takeover of the Kennedy Center is local news here. It's a major issue because of the impact that the shaping of culture has on ideas and on commitments people have. So for someone who's never been to see the National Symphony or the Chinese New Year celebration, nor the ballet, nor the opera, to take over the Kennedy Center seems to me rather an irony. That said, I think there have been times like this in our human history where wars and famines and droughts and fascism in several forms have taken place. And so we're not the first to have confronted these serious and sustained challenges to our way of life, to our hopes, to our dreams, to the world we wish to pass on to our children and our grandchildren. And certainly we are not the first to try to figure out what to do with our disdain and our disgust. And yes, I have to say, even I have been shocked by some of the things that I've seen. The delight that Mr. Musk has taken with his chainsaw in hand at cutting the very roots of people's lives out from under them. The president depicted as a king with a crown. This in 21st century United States is absolutely unspeakable and unheard of. But what I really pain for are the people who will die of AIDS because funding is cut, especially in Africa, or the kids who get measles when it is a preventable disease because of people like Robert Kennedy Jr. who have pushed the anti-vaccine approach. Lack of information on medical issues is really extraordinary, and the cutting of funds for the National Institutes of Health and their research pretends terrible things down the pike. National parks that will be neglected. and thousands of people who have lost their jobs. So what keeps me up nights are those things. But what also, I have to say in a local way, what also gives me great hope is the people stepping forward, like the photographer in my neighborhood who said, I'll take a new shot of anybody who lost their job. I'll take a new picture for them for their job search. Or the person who's a notary and said, I'll sign any of the documents for you for free to help you get on with your search. So you begin to see the human kindness emerge as well.
In a time like this, we need to mount a very strong opposition. What is your advice to NGOs, churches, and the civil society?
Well, I think we have a major role to play. I don't think the government can do it all. I think this is a case, as Audre Lorde told us, that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And she was right. So the role of religious groups and NGOs is really important. This is what we in religion train to do. You and I, Puilan, did not train to become orthodontists or engineers or doctors. Our expertise is understanding some of the history of humankind and learning what different people at different times and from different starting points with deep commitments did to create the common good. We've learned about the mistakes that were made and how many of our generation can try to do that same work without making the same mistakes. So we bring a lot of resources that government doesn't admit as evidence. For example, we look at sacred texts and prayers and liturgies and rituals of various and sundry religions, and we consider ethical teachings of respected ancestors. There's so much more that we bring. This is what we train for. So this is our work. Those in the pastoral area train to accompany people who are suffering and struggling. So their work is obvious. Most of all, we train to be able to call things by their names. And that's why Bishop Mary Ann Buddy of the Episcopal Church, was so helpful when she confronted President Trump directly and said, in frank words that will echo through the ages, in the name of our God, I quote her, I ask you to have mercy upon the people of our country who are scared now. They are gay, lesbian, and transgender, children of Democrats and Republicans and independent families, some who fear for their lives. And then there was another presiding bishop of the Lutheran Church, Elizabeth Eaton, struck the same chord in one of her documents, one of her letters to her sister, brother, sibling Lutherans. And she said that the orders from the White House were coming out in ways that were completely at odds with Lutheran polity and with Lutheran practices, orders to suspend all refugee settlements, new and sweeping enforcement policies, and so forth. And she went on to name the things that are absolutely against their religion. I found that very helpful. I also love the fact that 350 Reform and conservative rabbis published just a one-line ad in the New York Times. They said, and I quote, Trump has called for the removal of all Palestinians from Gaza. Jewish people say no to ethnic cleansing. I mean, what a way to step up. I think these are examples of how people in religion and NGOs are really moving forward and bringing resources that we simply don't have in the government.
You have so many years of organizing and activism. Can you share with the audience what kept you going for so long?
Well, you would refer to my age, but we are both around the same age, I think. I started my activism when I was in college. I'm now 73, and I started when I was in about 18 or 19 in college. So that's a long time. I went to Marquette University. I was part of a nonviolent group opposing the Vietnam War there. I was just a freshman. I really didn't know much, but yeah, I cut my teeth on those issues, on Vietnam, civil rights concerns. I was educated in Catholic settings, especially with Franciscan sisters in Syracuse, New York. Many people of peace live in Syracuse. It's interesting, the Berrigan brothers and so many other prominent Catholic peace activists. But more importantly, Syracuse is a stone's throw from Seneca Falls, where the women's movements began in earnest in the late 19th century in the debates about suffrage. And so I feel like I certainly grew up drinking the same water as some of those people. And I began to see the importance of working hard for justice, not only for others, but for myself as well. There's a great tendency when you're white and upper middle class, well-educated and cis, to see everybody else's issues and not your own. And so it's only, I think, when you dig into your own issues, for me as a woman and as a lesbian, that I began to see the connection and what we now talk about as interstructured issues. I have understood now in later years that, in fact, my whiteness protects me, that my cisgender identity protects me, and that in fact my job is to spend my privilege every place I can spend it. And that means time, money, efforts, focus, and risk. What keeps me going really are family and friends like you and community. We're so lucky to have so many people who see the world as we do. But my deepest held values, love and justice, really do come and were nurtured for me in the Christian tradition, but they come from many other traditions as well. I think that human beings and all of life are really just part of a wondrous mystery of creation. And we owe ourselves and those who come after us and that which comes after us, because of, I think here, of animals and land, we owe protection. And it's a great joy to do this work. And I think that now I've really shifted my focus away from my own issues in a certain sense to see this bigger picture where people like me who have the possibility to stand up, must stand up, must step out, because the most marginalized in my religious commitment have a priority claim on my energies. And to change their marginalization, the conditions of their marginalization, is really the work I want to do.
Sometimes we cannot believe that we are still fighting for reproductive justice in 2025. It is as if the clock is moving backward. Can you say something about reproductive justice?
Yes, I think reproductive justice is one of the central themes of our time. I grew up really on the cusp of Roe, so by the time I was of reproductive age, Roe was pretty well established. And for Catholics, of course, I think our reproductive age was much later, because we were certainly not encouraged to early sexual experiences. But Charlotte Bunch said it well recently in a water talk. She said, if women do not have the right to make choices about our bodies and our health, we are not full citizens. And that, I think, in a nutshell, says it, that in order to be full citizens as women, we have to be able to choose, both in terms of our reproductive choices and also our partners in love. And I think that that's why the LGBTQ and the reproductive justice issues have become so important. I also think from a Catholic perspective that Black women have done a marvelous job of moving this discussion away from choice to justice. And the reproductive justice work of Loretta Ross and friends, I think, has helped, or should help, Catholics to understand the complete consistency of Catholic theoethics with a pro-choice, pro-reproductive justice view. Because in fact, it says not only are we to have as many children as we want, but to have no children if we do not want to have children, and that we also have a third right, which is to bring up those children we choose to have with the resources they need. And that is the three-pronged approach of reproductive justice that Black women have shown us, and I think it's completely consistent with a Catholic theological teaching of responsible use of the body and of the agency of women needing to be taken into account. So I'm very optimistic about that, and I think the Roman Catholic Church will go down in history as having been one of the major opponents of not only queer people's lives, but also it will have the blood on its hands of women who die unnecessarily because of either septic abortions or the inability to get an abortion.
Do you have particular spiritual practices or self-care practices that you do to maintain your health and spiritual well-being?
Well, yes, like yourself, Puilan, I try to live a balanced life. I come into the office pretty much at the same time in the morning, and I leave certainly by 6 o'clock, and I rarely work at night. So I try to keep my work day. It's a long work day for someone later in a career, but it's a long work day, but it's a good work day. And I also am very, very careful with diet. I have long been mostly a vegetarian, sometimes vegan, and I certainly have great attention to things that I enjoy physically, like swimming. My best time for prayer and meditation is in the YMCA swimming pool, which is outside or inside for those who are less hardy, but outside all year round here in Washington. If the temperature's over 32 degrees, we're in the outside pool. And even if it isn't, we beg and plead until we can be. Because I think that physical exercise is really important. And it also gives me a time and a place for meditation. I also like to cook. I enjoy good food, and I love the company of people enjoying a meal together. And so, no occasion in our family is considered too small for a celebration or a nice meal together. I'm also very lucky because I have a wonderful partner in Diane New, and we have our terrific daughter, Catherine Fabian Hunt New, who is now in her 20s. So, being with her keeps me on the young side of things, learning these new technologies and techniques every day. And I've long been part of a local women's church group. I don't, in fact, go to church. I'm not a person who attends a local church. In the Catholic situation, that's difficult to be confronted in a supposedly spiritual situation by the reality of women's lack of leadership in liturgy and ritual, in prayer and sacrament. The lack of ordination of women does not enhance my prayer. So I simply don't do that. But I do belong to a small women's-based community that's been around for a long time, now losing members due to natural attrition. But I also find a lot of my spiritual encouragement in the arts. Just this week, I was at the opening of a new exhibit at the National Museum of Women in the Arts here in Washington, and I never miss their openings because I make that a part of my spiritual practice, to be exposed to something new, to think in a new way. And the new exhibit there is called Uncanny, and it's an effort to see how women deal with difficult situations. It was not an easy exhibit to see, but it was a helpful one. So those are a few of my sort of plodding along in the spiritual world. I always call myself an amateur at prayer. I know people who are much better at that than I am, but that's the best I do.
I like that. Amateur in prayer.
I'm an amateur at prayer.
Yeah, these days, many people are thinking the country is not going in the right direction. And
do you mean it's going to hell in a handbasket? Was that what you wanted to say?
Yeah. So, do you have any advice?
Well, I'm not much on giving advice, but the three things I would say is, first, for people who are feeling overwhelmed and depressed, I think it's important to affirm that there are real reasons for it. There is a consequential deconstruction of many good aspects of our society going on before our eyes, and it is very hard to watch, and we want to do everything we can. You and I are meeting on the day when we are boycotting. We're not spending money today. There is a catastrophic impact on the world, beginning with climate change, of many of the things that are going on. So if you're feeling overwhelmed and depressed, congratulate yourself. You're feeling the real thing. Secondly, I think if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably more privileged than 95% of the known world. So this is not to run roughshod over your feelings or what I just said, but to help get perspective, to get a grip, and to get going. Because we who are privileged, who have the possibility to do these things, must do them. And that get going is my third bit, which is that action, I think, is the best antidote in this situation. There's some things we're invited to do that will just keep us busy. For example, as I watched the government asking government employees a second weekend in a row, a weekend no less, a second weekend in a row to write out their 5 bullet points. That's just keeping them busy because they can. That's not helping anyone with anything. And be careful with people who tell you, whether it's an economic boycott or a rally or some other Zoom calls to people that don't answer their phones. Be careful what you do, but do something. It's almost impossible to make wrong choices on action if you're resisting. And above all, I say, stay close to your family and friends, to your coworkers and your neighbors. Listen to them, respond to them, act with kindness toward them, like the photographer and the notary in my neighborhood who've offered their services for free, and laugh. Laugh in the face of these people. Laugh in the face of people who would do harm. It's all absurd, and we need not lose our sense of humor over it. So that's just, I don't know if that's advice, but that's certainly how I'm handling it. Some of the memes have just been marvelous. Some of them difficult, but some of them marvelous. One of the things that I've seen most recently that impacted me deeply was the meme of the statue of Our Lady of Guadalupe, La Guadalupana, as she's known in Central and South America, Our Lady of Guadalupe from Mexico. And it was a picture of her with ropes around her being led away by an ICE officer and by a police officer. And that painful image of Our Lady of Guadalupe being deported with other people, I think, speaks volumes to what's going on and the importance of religious and spiritual support for those who are being deported, who can imagine that, yes, she's going with us, and we are taking her with us as well. So those are the ways in which images help us, I think, to understand what's going on and to survive what's going on.
What are your sources of hope?
Well, I have great hope in history. I think that history has shown us that these terrible experiences have all, one way or another, been resolved, and that hopefully, the arc of the moral universe is, at least, as I said recently at the Society of Christian Ethics, at least the arc of the moral universe is blowing in the wind. It may not be bending toward justice quite, but it's at least blowing in the wind. Bob Dylan, forgive me. But speaking of music, I also find hope in some of the art forms. For example, Holly Near's wonderful song, I Am Willing, written in 2006. And I'll just read the first three stanzas of that to give you an idea. She writes and sings, I'm open, I'm willing. To be hopeless would be so strange. It dishonors those who came before us. So go lift me up to the light of change. There's hurting in my family. There's sorrow in my town. There's panic in the nation. There's wailing the whole world round. May the children see more clearly. May the elders be more wise. May the winds of change caress us, even though it burns in our eyes. Give me a mighty oak to hold my confusion, a desert to hold my fears, a sunset to hold my wonder, and an ocean to hold my tears. She concludes, I'm open, I'm willing. To be hopeless would seem so strange. It dishonors those who go before us. So lift me up in the light of change. I hear that, and I love the music, and I hear her voice, and it gives me hope that I've never lived without hope, and it would seem so strange for me. I come from a religious tradition where hope is baked into the entire equation. So I don't want to find out what it is to live without hope, but I think podcasts like this can be a source of hope, and I hope this one is.
Thank you very much, Mary. And if you like this episode, please subscribe to the channel, and I will see you in the next episode. Thank you.
Thank you, Pulan.